Sandra, I get a question. Like, there's a lot of information for your presentation here. And I'm thinking about how can we carry this out, the messages to the community, such as Chinatown. And the most important item that I'm thinking right now is the perception versus the reality. Because the community has certain perceptions, and it is very difficult to, even for a group like this, to change that perception.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
So like, for example, I just want to have an example, see how, let you to comment on that. Like the perception can be changed by experiences. So if there's a way that like somebody else likes to engage with AlphaHouse when you are coming down to Chinatown or other areas, and they can go with you guys and have some sort of experience to see how you handle the situation. Would that be possible?
Yeah, it's great. So I guess there's two things I'll say to that. And one is on the sort of education piece. So obviously this is a lot of information, and it can sometimes that perception piece can get lost because there's so much content here. So one thing Brian Wong has kind of been working with AlphaHouse, or AlphaHouse has been supporting, is he is looking at doing some education pieces, just some videos, or a small podcast just to talk about some of these things, and then also some education materials that include some visuals as well, which I think is helpful. If you're looking at a picture of an individual that you see on the street in Chinatown, and talking about why we have a perception of them as being dangerous, and that kind of being that education piece. I know we have been working with Brian on some of that. So I think that information will slowly start to become available. And then the other thing to your question about seeing, I agree, experiencing positive interactions is what helps us, get rid of some of those, some of that bias or that perception. And so we, our ambassador team is working with Chinatown right now on, some of those pieces. And what we could do for sure is have, one or two members at a time sort of accompany us when we do some of our outreach, so that you can see, some of those interactions, and even get to know some of the people that we work with on the street, who do spend a lot of time, walking around Chinatown, so that you can recognize them as well. And that can help with being, less scared or having a different perception. So we can definitely help set that up, in the coming months.
Okay, so I would encourage you to work with Mackie to try to arrange that possibility.
Okay? Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Chandra, it's Drew here. Is there a difference when you, I guess, report an encampment or some rough sleeping through the city's 311 app or directly to Dope Team, or does it go right to you anyways?
So it sort of does go to us. So AlphaHouse's encampment team, we have two different streams for that program. So one is just our main encampment team. So you call that number and they work all over the city. And then we also have a program, it's called Encampment PAL, PAL. And it's working with the PAL team, which is the City of Calgary encampment response team. So if you call 311 or you report an encampment on 311, it'll go to the PAL or the bylaw team, and they will actually dispatch, our encampment PAL team, which is one of an, AlphaHouse worker and a bylaw peace officer, and they'll attend the camp together. So either way, it will end up in the right hands. Basically, it just is a matter of where it is in the city, in terms of who responds.
Okay. Here's another, you can just add a little bit more about the needle pickup program, because you mentioned a stat the other day, I don't want to get it wrong, it's like 110,000 over some period, and I was trying to do the math of what that means, and it's, wow.
I know.
What does that mean for the average person?
Yeah. So we do, with the needle team, we do ArcGIS. So we actually do geospatial mapping for where we're picking up needles. And so you can actually see on the map, I mean, it is all over the city, right? that's partly why it's so the numbers are so high. And so we we just have 2 members on the team, so it's kind of crazy that they actually get that many. But we also have, when our dope team is out and about, when our ambassador team is out and about, they're picking up needles as well. And so sometimes you'll find, an abandoned camp and there might be 20 needles there. And so that's sometimes why that number ends up being so high. It's not, the average person isn't like walking past, 15 needles on their way to work necessarily, right? They might see one, discarded syringe in a clump of trees, for example. But a lot of the time what you see is when it's an abandoned camp, that's when you're seeing some of those larger numbers. So for the average person, probably they're not seeing that many, right? Unless they have a particular, route to work that passes by, some encampments.
What it meant, just for information, is what's the average person with the addiction? Do they use a needle once a day or more than once? I have no idea.
Completely depends. Yeah. And so actually the more common substance use is inhalation, not needles.
Sure.
And so harm reduction, clean needles is pretty much the most basic harm reduction option, right? So our outreach teams do hand out clean needles or harm reduction supplies. And so typically they come in a pack of 3. So typically you might see somebody use 2 or 3 in a 24, 36 hour period, something like that. But if you're using every day, that obviously adds up, right?
Yeah, well, like 110,000, that's just a lot. So.
I know. There's also a lot of people on the street though too, right? Like you're looking at a number that's 4,000, 5,000, right?
Yeah.
You gotta, so.
Yeah. And then my last question that I'll let others ask is just, it's maybe one of my assumptions, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm, aware of perception versus reality when it comes to danger and whatnot. I'm not too scared out there. But when it comes to things like theft, my assumption is that if I was to leave my bike over here, it would be gone. And I don't know if that's a myth or reality. Like maybe it's organized crime, people that are stealing bikes, not homeless people. So I'm just kind of curious, it would help my perception, I think, if I knew from someone like you a bit more facts.
So I would say, there's a couple pieces to that. One, bike theft is actually insanely high. So that isn't a perception issue. That is a reality. And it's both, there are some folks on the street who will steal a bike to use themselves or to sell. Like that for sure does happen. Especially because if you're thinking about getting around the city and you don't have any means really, like bike theft is very popular. But there is absolutely a criminal organization aspect to it as well, where you have, a group, a gang, right? Calgary does have, fairly significant gang involvement, where you'll have a gang who, territorially, they're staking their territory. There'll be bike thefts, for a 10-kilometer radius, in huge numbers. And then they're doing bike shops, right? Like that's, they're taking apart the bikes, they're selling certain parts of it, etc. And that does have a criminal aspect to it. The Calgary police actually have, if you register your bike, etc., it makes it easier for them to retrieve it, blah, blah, blah. So that's definitely an option. So in terms of theft, that's not really a perception issue. That is something that is happening. And there's catalytic converter thefts that are very high right now as well. Again, that has a criminal organization aspect to it. That's not your average individual on the street. They're not stealing catalytic converters, right? But in terms of, the violence or the danger perception issue, we know like crime has gone up around the city, right? We know that it's the highest it's been, crime is up. It's a tiny percentage in terms of how much higher it is than other years. But we also know that there are just in general more people falling on harder times, where you do see again, theft or crime or things like that happening in sort of different spades for a variety of different reasons. A lot of stuff gets attributed to folks on the street, when in actuality it's your neighbor who did it, or the kid down the street who did it. And when we do thefts at convenience stores and things like that, a lot of the time it's high school students, right? So but that you don't hear that narrative